Today, perhaps we will talk about a topic that we use most frequently during the day, but perhaps think about the least throughout our lives: human. More precisely, the secret of the human. Rumi says, if the ego is not disciplined, it is like a donkey that throws a person off its back. But if it is disciplined, it carries you to reach the truth. The mind is either at the service of the ego or uses the light of the soul as its guide. In other words, it acts with a higher understanding. The tongue, ear, hand, eye, mind, and heart also have their fuss. For every bad habit we have, for everything we have gone to extremes with, for everything we have idolized, we must fast from them. I hope that we all can achieve this secret in our journey back to balance, to our center, to our truth. Hello everyone. Today we will talk about a topic that we may use most frequently during the day, but perhaps think about the least throughout our lives: human, or rather, the secret of being human. At some point, we've all asked, who am I? Why am I here? Where do things like the soul, self, mind, or will stand? At least when we were children. But unfortunately, instead of seeking the answers to these questions, we often choose to get lost in daily life. This journey story that takes us inside ourselves may remind us of something today. Now let's pause for a moment and ask ourselves a question. What am I really? Just an organism functioning through biological processes, composed of cells, or a soul, consciousness, or ego? Where does the thing I call me stand among all these concepts? In the Quran, it is written that God breathed His spirit into Adam, and from this, it can be inferred that we are beings who are not just flesh and bone. On the other hand, the Quran also states that every soul will taste death. So this means that we also have a temporary aspect that belongs to this world. For example, our body, our ego, our sense of self-awareness.
Besides all this, there is also the intellect, will, and conscience. So which part of me directs my intellect and my will?
Which part of me is the one that governs the mind and will?
How do these interact with consciousness, the self, the body, or the soul? Does the mind illuminate the light of our soul? Or does it serve the shadows of our ego? As concepts and questions multiply, it's very normal for minds to become confused. This is where the mystery of human beings lies. Of course, what is a secret to some is obvious to others. As it is said in the Quran, can those who know be equal to those who do not? The being called human is such a complex and unresolved entity. Which one are you? The only answer to give is, you are all of them. You are both spirit and body, ego and consciousness. Can those who know be the same as those who do not know? This phrase emphasizes the level of consciousness. Humans are created as the most honorable beings, different from other entities, with the potential to know themselves and the Creator. The saying, those who know themselves know their Lord, also the only key to unlock this secret. To know means to know oneself. That is, it means a high level of consciousness, a high level of awareness. But before getting into this subject, I want to touch a little on the concepts of soul and self.
The soul is your truth, your divine essence. The self is your veil. The soul comes from God. It is unchanging and perfect. It is a divine trust that forms the truth of a human. It belongs directly to the Creator's realm of command and is beyond the concepts of time and space. It is limitless.
It's not of this world, in other words. But when it enters the human body, this limitlessness is veiled by the self. Ibn Arabi says, the soul is a reality that exists in God's knowledge. It is from the domain of command and is the essence of the human. However, the self becomes a veil over the soul and conceals the truth.
There are many reference verses for this. For example, a verse from Surah Al-Isra. They ask you about the soul. Say, the soul is from the command of my Lord. You have been given only a little knowledge of it. Or from Surah Sad. When I have fashioned him, that is Adam, and breathed into him of my spirit, immediately prostrate yourselves before him.
The soul is a secret placed in humans by the hand of God's power. And reaching this secret is only possible through self-knowledge. The soul requires a vessel, that is the body and the self, to experience itself in the world. The self is something shaped by who you are, your character, and your inclinations. For instance, some people are more compassionate, some are fiery, some like to share, some are envious, stingy. These are all actually workings of the self. In other words, we are in the test of disciplining, changing, transforming all our positive and negative selves. The Quran always advises purifying oneself.
In one verse, it says, by the soul and him who proportioned it and inspired it with its wickedness and its righteousness, he has succeeded who purifies it, and he has failed who corrupts it.
This verse shows us that the soul has some innate tendencies, but the person has the ability to direct and shape these tendencies. It says that God has inspired the soul with both evil and piety, that is, the right path, meaning the soul has both a good side and a bad side. Surah Yusuf, I do not absolve myself. Indeed, the soul commands evil except for what my Lord has mercy upon. Surely my Lord is forgiving and merciful. Here, the effect of the soul on character is clearly seen. These words from Prophet Joseph show that some tendencies of the soul within a person's inner world, such as anger, jealousy, ambition, it shows that if things like hatred are not controlled, they lead to evil and are harmful. And this means that people's character differences and tendencies emerge with the different workings of the soul. In Sufism, the nafs is a power that directs a person's inner world and needs to be disciplined. The tendencies, dispositions, and personality traits that a person is born with develop, improve, or worsen through the training of the nafs or when it goes out of our control.
Imam Ghazali says the self contains both animalistic and angelic attributes. If a person trains their self, they become angelic. But if they follow the bad desires of their self, they become animalistic. Rumi says something similar, stating that your real battle is not with the outside world, but with the self within you.
It is emphasized here that the self is shaped by a person's character, and one can develop oneself by struggling with it. Think of the self as a child that needs to be educated. Of course, there is no mistake in comparison. If we pamper it, it seizes the mind and will. It uses them for its own pleasures and desires. It eventually leads us to disappointment. Or, if you think of it like a mount, it becomes uncontrolled, if not disciplined, and either throws us off or drags us into an abyss. But if we can be a good tamer of the self, it elevates us. To sum up, no matter how much the soul carries the truth, when the shadows of the ego cover it, a person cannot see that truth. Let's say we have a glass container with dirt on it, and behind that glass the sunlight is shining brightly. But if we don't clean the glass, we can never see that light. The ego is like the dirt on this glass. If it's not cleaned, it covers the light of the soul. The voice of the soul gradually fades, and the mind begins to serve the ego.
There are verses in the Quran that directly speak about the levels of the self. The commanding self, which orders evil, is the lowest level. A person completely follows their desires, ambitions, and ego. Only self-awareness operates here.
It is the lower commanding self. There is only me and my desires. I view everything in duality as me and you.
At a higher level of the ego self is the nafsi lawama, or the self-reproaching soul. This means the person recognizes their mistakes, feels remorse, repents, but occasionally falls into the same mistakes again, as they haven't fully transformed. They fall into the commanding self. The tranquil self is referred to as the soul at peace. Here, the person attains inner peace, surrendered to God. He has surrendered his will to divine truth and has brightened the light of his soul. But this does not mean we will be here permanently. At this stage, there are constant ups and downs. You fall back into the reproaching self. Again, you fall into the commanding self. Then you rise again. This is a bit of a shaky area. We can say it's an area full of ups and downs. But generally, here, we can say that after fully acquiring it, the self has ceased to be a force dragging a person toward evil and has become a source of peace and wisdom. When we look at the Qur'anic verses, they divide the nafs into 3 levels in this way. However, Sufis say that there are a total of 7 levels of the nafs. They further elaborate on these 3 levels. Even they have intermediate levels, but I will not go into those topics now. In short, the being called human is a whole with its body, soul, nafs, consciousness, intellect, and will. We can say it is a package. Rumi says, if the self is not trained, it is like a donkey that throws a person off its back. But if trained, it carries you on its back to reach the truth. The mind, however, is either in the service of the ego, meaning only its interests, desires, worldly, the ones they can't let go of, the ones they idolize, they follow them, or they make the light of the soul their guide. In other words, they act with a higher understanding. That's why the level of consciousness and awareness is very important. Like the verse, are those who know and those who do not know equal. It is clearly stated that on the day of resurrection, we will be questioned with our souls, that salvation is in purifying our souls, and that everyone, meaning every soul, will receive the consequence of their actions. The more a person uses their mind and will with a higher awareness, the better they sense their own essence, their divine core. In other words, they know themselves. Ultimately, the soul's purpose is to lift the veils of the ego and reach the truth. What is at play here is not a struggle with the ego, but rather educating and transforming the ego, purifying it to possess good morals. In the end, we need both the ego and the soul. We should walk this path in their balance. The self is necessary for our actions in this world, but the soul is the other side. It is necessary to know our truth, to know ourselves, to know the Creator. In the Quran, there is a call for the self that has attained peace. O soul at peace, return to your Lord. Actually, the dimensions of heaven and hell are symbolically an experience of consciousness, according to the level of the soul's evolution and the soul's rank. The soul is either at peace, finding tranquility, or in torment. The world, the judgment day, the afterlife are not separate things actually. If you are of paradise, you will experience your own paradise both here and in the other realm. Every soul will be resurrected in the state they died. There are many verses supporting this hadith. It says, whatever you do, you will receive its return both in this world and in the hereafter. Many verses say this. In other words, wherever we are, the level of consciousness we are at constructs our heaven and our hell. Returning to the initial question, what is the secret of human beings? A human is not just a soul, because in this journey on earth, they are not just an ego self, because they carry a divine light, a trust from the Creator's soul within them. A human is a whole with their soul and self. We offer the trust to the heavens, the earth, and the mountains.
but they declined to bear it. Yet man undertook it. Here lies the difference and secret of human beings, the most honorable of creations, the vicegerent and steward of the Creator on earth. The verse says, "We created man in the best form, then reduced him to the lowest of the low." Every person is an Adam and will inevitably be expelled from paradise. To find his divine essence, his trust, every person must do so by his own effort, intellect, and will. To reflect all the names and attributes of the Creator on its pure mirror. The greatest key is to know oneself, to know one's secret. Finally, let's conclude with a hadith. God creates the first intellect and summons it into His presence. He asks the intellect, "Who are you? Who am I?" The intellect says, "You are the Almighty Creator. I am also your humble servant." The Most High said, "I have not created a being more honored than you." Then He created the ego and summoned it. He asked the same question, "Who are you? Who am I?" The self, ego, immediately replies, "You are you, and I am me." God throws the ego into hell, and after burning there for thousands of years, it appears before Him again. The Almighty asks the same question again and receives the same answer. "You are you, and I am me." After burning in hell for a few thousand more years, it appears again before God. And He asks the question again and receives the same answer. Then God leaves it to hunger. After a long period in hunger, the self finally comes before the divine presence again. He asks again, "Who are you? Who am I?" And this time the self replies, "You are a magnificent Creator, and I am your humble servant." The best way to discipline the ego, as Rumi says, is to eat less, sleep less, and talk less. If we want to discipline our ego, the way is fasting. But fasting is not just about food. There is fasting of the tongue, ears, hands, eyes, mind, and heart as well. Whatever bad habits we have, wherever we have gone to excess, of course, this varies from person to person. Wherever we have weaknesses, whatever we have idolized, whatever we worship, we should fast on those. Even our good habits can be harmful if excessive. It's necessary to be on the straight path, in other words, the middle path. We should discipline our negative traits and balance the ones in our positive traits that have gone to extremes. I wish for all of us to attain this secret on this journey of returning to our center and truth by finding balance. Stay with love and understanding.